Well, I'm here with Jamie Gutfreund, who is the Global Chief Marketing Officer for Wunderman. Jamie, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, David.
As part of the preparations for understanding the top 100 most valuable global brands for 2016, we do a whole series of focus groups with our WPP group company experts right across the globe. One of the things that came up in every single group, across every single sector, across every single geography, was the issue of millennials, Gen Y, Gen X. So let's start at the very beginning, in a sense. Let's just get a little bit of a definition of what those three are, and then we can talk about some of the issues that we as marketeers, as brand owners, have now in being able to communicate and build strong brands with those subsets of the population.
So I think the reason it gets asked all the time is because it's so important to understand, as you know, who your audience is and who your customer base is. And there's been a lot in the last few years in the media about generations. So let's just look at it this way. Boomers are the generation that was born after World War II. That's global. Then it goes Gen X. So boomers were a giant generation. Then Gen X happened. And Gen X is loosely 36 to 50 now, right? Half the size of boomers. Gen X are the latchkey children, as we like to say. They were the generation that was raised by wolves. They were the generation that was raised at a time of great global recession. There was no option of moving in with your parents. As we always say, if Gen X, when they graduated university, they would rather live on the street than move home with their parents.
That's fair enough.
Which is fair enough, as it should be. Then you've got millennials or Gen Y, and that term is a little bit interchangeable. It's very confusing, but let's just call them millennials for purposes of this conversation. There are about 2 billion of them around the globe. They represent about 400 billion in spending, and they are loosely somewhere between the ages of 19 and about 35 right now.
So most of our WPP experts across the various different sectors are saying that actually that generation is probably the most difficult generation to engage in brands, to talk about brand stories, to make your brand relevant. Give us a feel as to why they're different, and I suppose some of their attitudes and their feelings towards brands, society, and life in general.
I actually think they're not going to be the most difficult, so I'm going to be a little contrary for the purpose of this. I think that Gen Z, who's the generation after them, will be far more challenging. So we'll see. But for millennials, millennials were raised by their boomer parents at a time when competition was the conversation. There were so many of them, such a giant generation, that parents all over the world said, wait, how is my child going to get into college? How are they going to get jobs? How is there going to be attention? So what those parents did was they conducted a large-scale social experiment. And as employers, we all know, this is the generation that was raised to believe that they were special, that they could do anything, that they could be anything. Now, they get a raw deal because people talk about them as being expectant of good things, that they are demanding. And they are, but we have raised them to be that way.
Is that necessarily a bad thing?
No, I think it's actually quite a great thing. They're very optimistic. Forbes just came out with a study that said 97% of them think the world is going to be a great place to live, which is counter to other generations right now. But they are a generation that, because they were raised with so much optimism, that they really do believe the best in people. They believe the best in brands. However, they are challenging because they expect things to be customized, they expect things to be personalized, and they expect things to be done in real time and on demand. And that can be very challenging for legacy brands, especially when it comes to them as employees. That's a tricky space.
Okay, well let's move the employee bit to a little bit later on. We'll discuss that. What is it that brands need to do, should start thinking about doing, or do more of in order to bind those millennials closer to their brand, if indeed it's even possible. I mean, you might have a view on that as well.
I always have a view. I call millennials the optimization generation because they are very facile with data. And so brands need to understand that this generation has become accustomed to brands having access to their data. So the bar is much higher for their expectations of brands offering the right message, the right place at the right time. So brands need to get very sophisticated very quickly with how they understand data and, more importantly, how they generate insights. It's not enough to know what a consumer is. It's vastly more important to understand why. Why do they behave the way they do? Why do they need your product? Why are they expecting your brand or your marketing to be a certain way? Those insights are more than big data. It's really applying it in an empathetic way to Gen Y as a consumer base.
And why are they wanting things that are different, and how is that manifesting themselves in the way in which they buy products, services, make big purchases, participate in the general society?
Well, how they view purchasing things has shifted. So we all have talked about the sharing economy. So when they became of age, many of them could not find jobs. The economy was not great around the world. So they pivoted and they started to find different ways to view ownership. So for them, owning things has a different connotation to older generations, which is also challenging for brands, especially in the luxury sector. So they view ownership many times, houses, cars, jewelry, expensive retail goods, as an anchor that holds them back. That's a burden, which is a challenging place for a brand that wants to sell things. So they are only buying things where we call it a CPU, which is a cost per use. So they will look at buying something and they'll say, I can buy this for whatever the amount is, and they'll divide it by their anticipated use of the item, which is not how things have been sold traditionally. But they also want that item to be custom fit for them. They want it to be personalized. They want it to be ready for the Internet of Things. They want it to be digital. They want it to feel as if it was made exactly for them. And especially for mass marketers, that's not what those brands were intended to do originally. Those are legacy approaches that don't work for younger consumers anymore.
So what is the challenge for brands to reinvent their proposition and their supply chain to be able to do that, or to make their products more relevant to that new generation?
Quality. One of the key weapons in a brand's arsenal is to develop a good quality product. That's a key thing, is to make a product that either reflects well on the millennials brand me. So if I own a product, it makes me look like I'm smart. It makes me look like I'm fashionable. It makes me look like I am a savvy consumer. Or it's got to be made really well so that I can hold on to it for a long time, because I know that something is made well or not made well, and I'm going to do my research. And I think that's where data comes in, because consumers have access 24/7 to almost perfect information, and they will do their research. In fact, because they're so careful about their purchases, there's an average of 10 hours of research done for products that cost, on average, anything over about $250. It's quite a bit of research, whereas in the old days, when you and I were growing up, you would walk into the store, last week, you would walk into a store and just purchase something. Now there's an enormous amount of research that's being done into how the product was made, what it means, and what that brand stands for.
So how much does that impact how a brand opens up its supply chain, the way in which it does things, the information that it provides? Is that something that brands are going to have to do more of in order to satisfy that want and requirement in that very early stage of the purchase cycle?
I believe so, and research tells us that because of the awareness of how products are made and the fact that people are judged and evaluated on what brands they're supporting, because you don't just buy a product anymore. We call it venture consumers. I'm not just buying a product anymore, I'm investing in a brand. By me carrying around a certain brand, it means that I am giving my vote of confidence to the fact that this brand is a good brand. So I'm going to do my research. I'm also going to ask people who I respect. Now, that may not be people that I actually know. It could be a YouTube influencer. It could be someone that I've met online. But I'm going to seek out the opinions of other people. So the old-fashioned word of mouth is vitally important. One of the key things that brands need to do is to have a story. Storytelling is a crucial form of marketing. And storytelling that leverages data so that you can have a content experience that feels like the brand is talking to me, that is a way to have a communication that is very powerful.
You know, if you turn the clock back, I don't know, 60, 70 years, all brands had stories. And that was the essence of the establishment of the brand. What is the difference between a brand 30, 60 years ago, their story, and the story that's required today?
The story that a brand told before was in a much more limited capacity. It was either in store, maybe in print, and then it became a little bit more on TV, when we started to get to the digital age. Now, a brand story has to survive across multiple channels and be consistent both in the online digital world as well as in stores. Fascinating stat, 86% of millennials say they want a brand story to be consistent both digitally and in store. Meaning, if I walk into a store or an automotive a car dealership, and the brand story feels different than in the TV commercial, that's not going to feel consistent to me. So the storytelling has to be consistent across out of home, print, social media. That's a much more challenging enterprise. And typically that's done through multiple agencies, multiple times of a year, and it can be a big challenge for many brands today.
As millennials get older, as inevitably they will do, what's your feeling about whether their behavior and their attitudes will revert to type in terms of what previous generations have done? I mean, you know, a millennial who has 2.5 kids, who lives in the suburbs, needs to take their kids to football matches or soccer matches at the weekend, suddenly requires a car the whole time rather than just on occasions to share. So what's your view and perception at the moment as you look through the eyes of millennials to when they get slightly older? Things going to change?
This is how I always explain it. When I walk into a client's office and they say, when are things going back to when it was great, when it was so much easier? We can all be wistful. And here's the example that I give you. If you ever talk to someone who lived through the war or lived through the Depression, it doesn't matter what their life is like as they become an adult or move their circumstances of their lives, they retain that orientation. So for millennials today, to think that they're going to go back to the old way of doing things or the way that they used to do things or that people would expect them to do things, I think is wishful thinking. I think that it's expected that things will change. Now, they are cord cutters and they are cord nevers in terms of TV. They are watching an enormous amount of content. It's just not in the same way. So we can't expect them to go back and automatically have a cable subscription the way they used to because there's just so many other options. But the key thing to remember is that it's not mutiny. It's all about efficiency. If you think about it, Netflix, just a much more efficient way to watch content. Uber is just a much more efficient way to get transportation. And then there's Tinder. We don't have to go into that.
What's that more efficient for?
Exactly. Exactly.
We've talked about them as a group, as consumers. Let's talk a little bit about millennials as employees. What are the challenges for brands trying to attract millennials, first of all, and then having them work in the traditional work environment?
I think the word is the traditional work environment. What is traditional anymore? So most companies are set up or were set up in a command and control environment. There's the CEO, the vice presidents, and on, and it's a classic pyramid structure. That's a challenging environment for millennials because they were raised by their parents. So as boomers, you have to put blame where blame is due. Boomers raised their children to feel as if their voices and their opinions should be heard. So when they walk into their place of employment, they expect their opinions to be heard, and they expect to have access to the CEO. They expect to be part of the conversation. That is not how many companies were set up. Now, the other thing that's very interesting about them is that they expect and want a stake in the outcome. They want to feel connected to how company decisions are being made, but they also want to contribute. And I think that their effort to contribute can sometimes be viewed by older generations as not following the hierarchical tradition of earning your way in. And that's a little challenging, except I think what's really important is that they have great ideas. And as long as we recognize, again, that it's not mutiny, it's efficiency, it's their eagerness, it's their optimism.
So who's going to give, the corporation or the millennials?
It's a numbers game. Eventually
they'll take over.
They'll take over, and they already have. We're all seeing it. What's interesting is right now in the workplace, you're actually starting to see 4 generations in the workplace. You've got boomers who are never retiring. You've got Gen X. Then you've got this giant generation of millennials. And now you've got Gen Z who are just entering college, and they are starting to be interns. And so you've got 4 generations that are working and coexisting in the workplace. And that's going to be a very interesting environment. And I think that millennials, just like Gen X has been challenged by millennials are going to be challenged by Gen Z. What? So they'll get theirs, and that could be kind of a comfort for anyone who's frustrated, exactly.
So finally, before we end, just talk a little bit about that Gen Z. So they're fast coming up. They've clearly,
yes,
from their first out of the womb, they've been an iPad generation and a digital generation.
Digital natives.
What impact is that really going to have?
So they're 18 and under right now. And when you look at Gen Z, they are, even if they're not your customers today, they are a proxy for where the world is going. We just did some research, and they also are very pessimistic about the world. They don't trust the governments. They don't trust brands, nor should they in some ways. Like, who can blame them? That's all they've known. They grew up post 9/11. They grew up post-recession. So their expectations are very different than millennials. They are very practical and very much about being resilient. They are the children of Gen X who have raised them to be resilient. So as consumers, they expect products to work very well. They want marketing to show them how to use the product, not just the benefits of it. They want practical. They don't want a product that is promoted as being perfect. The days of models getting out of a car in a cornfield with their hair blowing back and putting on lipstick, that won't work for them. This is the YouTube generation. They want practical how-to advice on what a product will do for them. They want to know how to take care of a product, and they want to know that a product will retain its value. Because when they are buying things, they're looking for resale value. They're looking at products as an investment, and they want to know if they will be able to resell it in the future, which is a very different way of looking at products than previous generations.
We've seen a whole series of new ways of financing products, Kickstarter and the like, etc. What's the attraction for those new generations of those types of fundraising? Is it about having something invested in the brand, co-creating with the brand, being a part of that brand story?
I think that's appealing to all generations, but again, a generation that's been raised to feel as if they are participating in everything. They're video game generations. They are personalized generations where they can control every aspect of their life, and those investments give them a stake in the outcome. They make them feel like they have a horse in the race. And it also makes them feel as if they are shareholders. Again, venture consumers. Their opinions are being incorporated into the manufacture of the product, into how it's displayed, in terms of its utility. And that seems much more practical for them than to just buy a product off a shelf that they had no say in. Not that interesting to them.
So the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for 2016, every single brand that's made the ranking this year has to, in one form or another, attract millennial consumers. So finally, what advice would you give to all of those brands in terms of how they can attract millennial consumers and continue to be relevant for years to come?
Have a very clear story, and have a story that will work across all digital platforms, will work on television, and that will work globally. I think that's a key function, that you are consistent across all channels.
Jamie Gutfreund, Chief Marketing Officer Global for Wunderman. Thank you very much, Steve, for joining us.
Thank you very much, David.